Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar focusing on COVID-19 and Canadian immigration. Today, we are joined by partners Shoshana and Ravi. Jain. We will save some time at the end of the webinar for your questions, so please feel free to type out your questions in the text box in the pop-up toolbar on your screen. You can also reach out to us at info@gans.com or by emailing the contact emails provided on screen. Don't forget to follow us on social media and sign up to our alerts where we provide the latest immigration updates and breaking news. And with that, I'll hand things over to our panelists.
Well, thank you, Stephen. And yeah, if we don't get to all the questions, you're always welcome to email Shoshana and I directly. You can navigate on our website and find our biographies and find our email addresses. And if you're an existing client, feel free to reach out to the lawyer you're working with. But first, I'll start with work permits generally. I'm doing weekly calls with the government in Ottawa and all the different department heads there. And this week they invited the Canada Border Services Agency to the calls. I suggested that last week. And so they were both on the line, Immigration and the Border Services Agency. And so we were able to discuss a lot of ongoing issues that lawyers across the country have been facing. One of them is the issue of, biometrics. So if you're an American citizen, you don't need to do it. But if you're coming in for a work permit and you're not American, then you have to get a biometrics done. And the messaging has been that, you are we're open for business, and we if you have a job, you're welcome to come under any of the work permit categories. But, the issue is, are the biometrics on hold or not? And there were reports that they were being done at certain airports. I know that there has been a prioritizing of agricultural workers given the food supply, and we need about 60,000. I think tens of thousands have already been done and brought in. But we're not so sure if it's being done universally. And initially, the Canada Border Services Agency directors were saying that, listen, they don't really want to take on biometrics for people coming in from overseas countries, because the biometrics VAC offices and other offices that normally do them should be doing them, and CBSA doesn't want to necessarily take on that work function. But then when pressed, they did admit that they are doing them, and the concern, of course, is the health and safety of the officers, because it's a close contact type of activity. But they do have safeguards, and they are actually doing them. So we're pushing back and trying to get further clarity on that, because it seems a bit vague, but the reports are that they're doing them. In terms of employees, let's say you have an employee and their passports are expiring, and they're saying, listen, my consulate's closed, my embassy's closed, I can't get a work permit extension. The guidance there is just to, contact us. We can file the work permit anyway and explain and invoke some of the guidance that we've received, that they should, hold the applications until they can get their passports renewed, and we can facilitate with those extensions. LMIAs, the good news on those are labor market impact assessments for those work permits where there's no other exemption and you have to go through our Department of Labor called Service Canada. They are taking emailed applications, which is wonderful news. There's also getting back to new work permits, again, the department said that it is possible to obtain a new work permit, but then the question is, can dependents come or not? And I think it's clear that if the employee is coming from the United States and has been there for 14 days, then their family can come with them, their spouse, common law partner, kids, etc. If they're coming from outside the United States, I would say the answer is maybe. And the reason I'm saying that is because the law, which is called the Order in Council, relating to countries outside the U.S., says that you have to be reuniting. It uses that language of reuniting. So when this was drafted, the idea was, if you have an employee who's here in Canada, then we may be able to bring, the spouse and kids. If the spouse has a permit, like a study permit, issued before March 18, or if the spouse has a work permit, like an open work permit allowing them to work anywhere, then they can certainly come. But if the kids have visitor visas, then they would need, under the new order in council that was released, a special consular approval letter or email. And we are starting to get those, by the way. So the issue then is, okay, but if you're a new applicant, then of course you're not reuniting because you're all abroad. All of you are coming from some third country. So again, the guidance is that they can come if the main worker comes first, and then afterwards, applies for the kids and the spouse. If the spouse doesn't have a work permit or study permit, then they can come, because at that point they would be reuniting. So I am pushing back on that because it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to have the worker come and then say, okay, now I'm separated, so I'd now like to invoke the reuniting provision of the order in council and then have my spouse and kids come. That doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense to me. So, and the reality is that we are getting some reports on the ground where, and in terms of our own office, where we filed, and they've all been able to come, even when there's no reuniting, but they're all fresh applicants and all of them have been able to come together. So that's one thing we're trying to get clarification on. When work permits are expiring, I think a lot of employers will have questions about work permits that are expiring, what to do. And I think the guidance clearly that we should do the extensions. So contact us and we can file for the extensions, even if the person has a work permit based on a labor market impact assessment. And of course, we know that there's lots of people going on EI and lots of people getting laid off, and the whole labor market is in flux and changing dramatically. But nevertheless, the guidance is send in that work permit application extension, and they will hold it, and the person will be able to continue to work by law under what we call implied status. So some other ongoing issues, who to contact to get an exemption from quarantine. So we are being contacted by companies and employers that need to bring in workers urgently, maybe for critical infrastructure. Maybe there's a public health exemption where the person's needed immediately to help with, in the healthcare sector. And we don't have guidance on who to contact for those situations where the person will not be able to quarantine for 14 days because they're needed so desperately. So it's on the books and in the rules that these folks can come in, but we don't have guidance on who to contact and how to get that done. So I'm actively working on that, and I hope to have an answer next week or earlier. But the other one that is very much a hot topic right now is the difference between optional discretionary and essential. And so the ordering councils, the laws that are on the books right now, say that the test is it optional or discretionary? And the Immigration Department has confirmed for me that, if you're certainly a working holiday person who's just coming here for a life experience, it's more akin to travel and tourism and making a few bucks as you do that. That's not really, that's more considered to be optional or discretionary. So those folks aren't going to be able to come. If you had a work permit but your job doesn't exist, well, again, that's pretty, it's not meeting the optional or discretionary test. But the concern is that it seems that if you meet one of the guidance from immigration was clear that if you meet a category of qualifying for a work permit and your job is still there, then that is not an optional or discretionary purpose, and so you should be allowed to come. And here's the problem. The problem is that folks are going to the border and they're trying to get those work permits, and the border agency seems to be employing a separate test, which is an essential purpose test, beyond the basic requirements of the work permits, beyond the fact that the person actually has a job in hand. And that is where, I'm desperately trying to get some clarification on this, because these are reports right across the country, and so we are trying to resolve that. So that's another ongoing issue. Lastly, there was an issue about declaring. So in the future, if you've had COVID-19 and you're coming in, some of the forms will ask, do you have a medical condition, and should you disclose this? And the guidance was that, oddly enough, that the person need not disclose that particular issue. They, of course, have to disclose if they're coming in now under the Quarantine Act. They have to disclose because they may need to have a plan for self-isolation. But that is something that we are actively trying to get guidance on and clarification on, because it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. In terms of lastly, in terms of permanent residents, there was not an express entry draw, we thought, but as it turns out, there has been one relating to the PNPs, but provincial nominee programs, but the last one related to the Canada Experience class, and so the guidance from the government is and that people should continue on with putting their profiles in, and they will have draws and be selected out. But they're still looking at that. But so far, so good. If you're laid off, that will affect you differently. If you're trying to accumulate time under the Canada Experience class and you don't quite have your 12 months, there's no provision by the government at this time to exempt you from the 12-month requirement. If it's under the provincial nominee program, and if you need arranged employment points, that is, if you are getting points for having a job offer, and all of a sudden you're laid off, again, there's no special measures to help you at this point. They are still proceeding, by the way, with humanitarian applications, sponsorships, etc., by paper, and so we've asked them to accept online applications for these types of applications that are traditionally by paper, but they are choosing not to do that at this time. For landing interviews, so when you're approved as a permanent resident, you may be tempted to go to the border if you're in Canada and do what's called flag polling to become a permanent resident, and the guidance continues to be don't do that, and there'll be telephone landings very soon. So you can become a permanent resident, and it can be affected by phone, but that's coming. If you're abroad and your confirmation of permanent residence or your approval for permanent residence was issued before March 18, then you can come, but you should have a plan to self-isolate, including getting your first groceries and all that stuff. Having them brought for you, rather. If your permanent resident visa is expiring and you're abroad, then you need to refer to what they call the web form and update them on that. Of course, they are still issuing approvals for permanent residents and issuing confirmations of permanent residence, just at a reduced capacity. So I'll now ask Shoshana to handle some of the next kinds of questions and hot issues, and I think one of them was about switching from work permits when you have a new employer and you can't get an open work permit. Shoshana had a great idea about the airport, so I'll let her elaborate on that suggestion.
Yeah, thanks, Ravi. Ravi gave a great summary outlining sort of the current situation right now. Just a couple of issues. I think the biggest overall sort of topic of everything is that immigration is still open for business, and they're still accepting applications. But what clients and companies and anybody who is interacting with the system at all need to understand is that you must have a lot of patience right now on a number of different elements. The first one is the processing times. Obviously, this is a new normal, and applications which are currently in, we don't know if it's going to take longer, or perhaps it will be shorter because there's less people putting applications in because of the travel ban. For those applicants who are putting new applications in, there will be the practical reality of not being able to meet all the requirements, but immigration has identified that they will be very flexible on that. They will not be refusing applications for acceptance who are missing certain pieces, as long as you indicate in those submissions that, the pictures aren't perfect because I can't get to a photographer, I can't get my police clearances because, the government offices are closed, and you have to specifically relate those requests to the current situation. You can't just put applications in which are missing pieces and not specify. So from a practical perspective, it's extremely important to be very careful about how you are communicating with immigration and the information that you are providing them. And it goes back to the scenarios of presenting yourself at border points, both abroad at airports or airports in the U.S. or on land. There are so many moving pieces, and the more prepared you are to have the proper information with you, they are, you just have to be certain. But at the end of the day, strange things are happening, but we will do our best to ensure that the individual whose process we are handling will be able to have the highest chance for success, notwithstanding the unique circumstances. So let's talk about individuals who are in Canada right now. A lot of individuals may be in Canada through the Working Holiday Program, or perhaps through the young professionals. Maybe they've committed to different programs, or maybe they're in situations where a new employer wants to hire them given their unique skills. Let's talk about the ones who don't necessarily have job offers, but are in situations where they can want to continue working, and maybe they don't have their LMIA app. So what are they going to do? They're coming up to their expiry. Well, it's our advice to put those applications in for extension. Practical side is if you didn't do biometrics before, you're not going to be able to do them, but the government is pushing that off and giving extensions of time. So you're going to be able to buy yourself some significant period of time under the implied status, which Ravi had referred to earlier. And I think there's going to be a lot of flexibility as far as all of these extension applications. But let's focus on individuals who need those, who actually need to get that new work permit. What are they going to do? Well, you can't do the flag polling that Ravi had mentioned. You can't go to the border points. No one is leaving Canada and coming back in, because a lot of individuals, theoretically, if they're visa exempt, can present applications for work permits at port of entries when they enter. And so they're left with filing an application online and then waiting for immigration. Let's say they do meet all the requirements, to turn it around. And under normal circumstances, it was taking about 3 to 4 months to get new work permits if you have a new employer or you're changing categories. That's not practical. And, maybe we want to think outside the box, where let's think about where there's places inside Canada that can actually physically issue a work permit. Maybe the airports can try and facilitate that, who knows? Or maybe immigration should think about issuing a digital work permit, instead of these paper-based ones we have to wait for in the mail, and who knows how long mail is taking. I mean, Immigration and Service Canada, it's ironic that sort of one of the benefits of this new world is they're really moving towards digital processing, which is something the bar has been trying to get in place for a long time, and maybe this will push them in the right direction when it comes to those types of scenarios. Another area that I wanted to touch on was students. I really feel for the student population right now, because for those who are abroad, this is usually high season processing study permit applications for the September cohort. So obviously right now, unless you're American, you're not going to be able to come to Canada to do the travel ban, but the government has announced that they will permit those individuals to start the programs of study online, as long as the entire program itself, at least 50%, is completed in Canada. So that's a good news story about flexibility for students. So we're advising individuals, if you do have those letters of acceptance, get them in, even though maybe you can't do the biometrics, or maybe you need a medical, or maybe there's a police clearance, who knows, but at least you're in line. And that's the bigger picture here too, not just study permits, but all temporary resident applications and permanent residence applications. We want individuals to get in line, get as far as you can get, notwithstanding the limitations of what we're facing right now. Because when we do go back to our new normal, there's going to be a huge push for everything to happen as quickly as possible. And in our opinion, if you're in line, you're just going to be that much further along and ahead of the game. So, I guess the lasting impression here is that individuals, nothing has changed as far as, individuals having to meet certain program requirements. The law is the law. The new law, as far as travel bans, that's obviously something additional. But as far as the basic immigration programs, it's still business as usual. You still, even if you get that acceptance letter from a university or college, you still have to satisfy the immigration requirements of the study permit. You still have, even if you have that job offer, you still have to meet the particular requirements of the particular program. But immigration is obviously going to be scrutinizing things in a similar manner. You know, are they going to be any nicer or give you more leeway? I think with the in-Canada extensions, there's maybe be some flexibility there. But other than that, you know, it's still the same rules apply, and, you know, their immigration is happy to refuse if you give them a nice reason to do that. And hopefully none of you will be doing that in the future. And we want to make sure that individuals are set up for success and have the best chance possible to succeed with their particular application. That's pretty much all I wanted to touch base on. I think there was one individual who asked a question about applying for PR from within Canada, if there's any impact, any delays. Obviously, it just goes back to we can't advise on the length of a delay, but there probably will be, or maybe there won't. We just don't know. It's all, you know, educated guesses right now. But applications are still being processed. The different government organizations are processing. ESDC is processing. IRCC, I just got an access response today. That was very exciting. So things are happening. Things are moving. And individuals just, you know, the whole theme of it is be patient and smart about things. That would be my ending bit of advice.
Yeah, and I would agree. And I mean, I'm looking throughout a lot of the questions, you know, are there updates on citizenship applications? Are they on hold? You know, are PR applications still being processed? Are they on hold? Can I submit an incomplete application? I can't get a photo done, etc. The answers to all those questions are that, you know, things are not on hold. They are being processed. You can submit incomplete applications. The guidance from the department is quite clear that if your application is incomplete because of COVID-19 and because of issues surrounding that, it will not be returned. It will be held until you can get them what they need. So that is the guidance. Another question related to, you know, I'm here from the States. My 6 months is coming up. I've got animals here. I've got, you know, my life is here. What do I do? I'm supposed to leave. And this sort of relates to what I always see as a bit of a myth, which is that, you know, as long as people think you have 6 months, and which generally is true. We have to check that, but generally that's true. I mean, the department can issue less than 6 months if they wish, and sometimes people are not aware of that. But if 6 months is given, there's a myth that, okay, if I go back to the States or leave to my home country or somewhere else, and then I return again right away, they have to let me in because I followed the law and I was here under 6 months. And that's not necessarily the case. Because if it seems like you're visiting your home country and living in Canada, then they may not let you in as a visitor again to Canada. But the answer to this question is that yes, it is possible to apply for a visitor extension from within the country, and you know, we have to explain why you need to stay here, what the issues are, and we can refer to the new laws, and we can document your purpose and everything else. So I would say reach out to us, and we're well situated to help you with those kinds of applications, but definitely it's possible. See, Shoshana, were you reading anything else you wanted to tell?
Hard for me to see for some reason. Someone asked about quarantining in a hotel. I mean, as long as your plan is reasonable and you're going to self-isolate, you know, that's more of a health issue and how you put that's a practical side, but it's possible.
And I think some of the other questions were about, look, I'm on a closed work permit now and I got a new offer. What do I do? How can I get it? Can the LMIA, the Labor Market Impact Assessment, be processed? How long will it take? And this is a real live concern. I mean, I've raised this at the last few meetings I've had with the government, because people, you know, if you're lucky enough to have a job offer in this environment and you want to switch jobs or maybe you got laid off, I mean, it's better for everyone if you're working. And this sort of related to what I thought was a great suggestion from Shoshana, which is to maybe use the airports to print, or maybe have the digital work permit, have some solution where people can get working quickly, because the status quo of 3 to 4 months, you know, waiting for the in Canada processing office to switch you over, or waiting for an LMIA, which right now, you know, might be a challenge to get. Who knows? You know, we need to get people working. So, and there may, I mean, if you're an IT worker, there may be exemptions too that we can invoke. So keep that in mind. So reach out to us and we can figure that out. Any other questions, Shoshana?
Yeah, someone said they're waiting for their citizenship to be concluded and I guess their PR card's expired. That's not an issue. People should understand that the expiry of a PR card does not mean your PR is over. It just means the card's expired. And I always describe the card as an airplane ticket. There's lots of individuals living in Canada as permanent residents who've never had a PR card, who just don't travel. So it's always our advice, you know, if you do have any possible travel plans in the future, to get a valid card just for your sort of an insurance policy, because citizenship processes generally are 12 months, but then again, you may have a complicated one, or maybe there's a flag in there and something pops up that you're just unaware of. So it's always good practice to have it, but from a legal perspective, an expiry date on a PR card is irrelevant as long as you stay in Canada and you're not traveling. So it's really not an issue. I wouldn't be concerned about it.
There's another one about, you know, I seem to have enough points for express entry. I'm just waiting for the draw. Can I submit a bridging open work permit without submitting the actual application for permanent residence? So I would say if your work permit is expiring and you're within the 4 months of expiry, which is the requirement for the bridging open work permit, I would say absolutely get the application in. I've had situations where, you know, people were about to be selected and they weren't actually even selected, and I was able to later match up the fact that they got an invitation and the work permit extension was approved. So regardless of the normal rule, which is that you have to, you know, have some kind of provisional approval, you know, in COVID-19 times, I would say the guidance is quite clear. Just get it in and you'll have implied status, and that is clearly what the government is encouraging people to do. Now, someone else, the last question I'll take is, someone asked about Canada Experience Class and PNP draws for express entry. Why are they the only ones that are being selected right now? And I would just say don't read too much into that. The government has always had the power to restrict a draw to a certain category, which we've seen them do twice now. But that doesn't mean that they'll continue to do that. So I wouldn't draw too much into that.
Yeah, I think that about covers all of our time, Stephen.
Awesome. Okay, well, I'd just like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. I hope you found it very informative. And I'd also like to thank partners Shoshana and Ravi for taking the time to share their expert advice today. Make sure to sign up to the alert at the link provided on screen to stay up to date with the latest immigration news. And until next time, everybody, stay safe.